Good evening. It is good to see all of you this evening. I'm so excited to be here. Sunday nights for me, and I say this all the time, but Sunday nights for me growing up were the worship service I wanted to be at. It was that time of singing and study, and I know it's probably not super appropriate to have your all-time favorite worship service. But for me, it was Sunday evening, and so it is so exciting for us to get to gather here together to worship God this evening with one another. Recently, we have been going through this series in Exodus. John has been doing a great job walking through the last couple weeks, Exodus 1 and 2 in week 1, and Exodus chapter 2 and 3 last week. And if you remember last week, and by the way, we're going to get into Exodus chapter 5 tonight. So if you want to go ahead and be turning there, that'll make it more convenient for you in just a moment, so you're not, flipping through and getting distracted. But last week, as we were in Exodus 3 and 4, just a brief recap, if you remember, we were looking at this idea, and it was the time of the burning bush, and God coming to Moses and saying, hey, Moses, you're going to go and you're going to lead my people out of the land of Egypt. And if you remember some of the things we talked about, John touched on this idea of going from sheep to people, and that's a huge leadership transition. And we saw Moses making excuses, and we also saw God make a promise to Israel, and he says, Moses, you're going to lead my people out of Egypt, out of their bondage, out of their misery. And so that's where we are when we're going to pick up here in Exodus chapter 5 this evening. But before we really get rolling and get into things, I wanted to stop for a moment because we're going to use a word pretty constantly tonight. And I didn't want to just start out by using that word and say it over and over again, and you'd be like, no, that's being misinterpreted. And the word is this idea of comfortable. Now, in the standard use of the word comfortable, you generally think, and I don't know, we really started using it a lot more in 1950, which is a fact that nobody really cares about, except for that we really have started using it more in the last 70 years. But if you think about this word comfortable and look at the actual definition, you're going to get this kind of idea of a luxurious lifestyle, or luxurious and incredibly comfortable. And you would sit there and say, okay, maybe if you're really comfortable, we would look at that as the idea of maybe it's a luxury hotel or a luxury car, and we're sitting there and we're saying, okay, if we're going and staying at a luxury hotel, we're going to be really comfortable. If we're driving a luxury car, we're going to ride around and not feel a bump on the road, and have a massage feature going while we're driving. But what I want us to stop tonight is rethink that word comfortable, because I think since we have used it a lot recently over the last several years and it's becoming more and more prevalent, I think maybe the word comfortable can be redefined to a few different ideas. In tonight's discussion, I want us to think about this idea of comfortable meaning more of a mental comfort or a comfort in interaction with others. And so instead of it being like, you know what, I am going to go stay at a luxury hotel or a really comfortable hotel where I'm going to have all these lavish things placed upon me, I wanted to think about it in a little bit more of this idea of saying, okay, I am going to, in my day-to-day life, I'm going to have this just comfort of a mindset, and I'm not going to have a lot of constant stress and a lot of things placed on me by others. And with my interactions with other people, I'm not going to sit there and I'm not going to butt heads with individuals, and I'm not going to have constant arguments, and people aren't really going to disagree with me. I live in this comfortable place in my interactions and in my mental state. And it's kind of this idea of this feeling of, even though not everything is perfect, I have what I need, my family is taken care of, that general mindset. So as we use the word comfortable tonight, think less about just extreme luxury and more about this mental and interaction state where we're sitting there and we're comfortable in those ways. Now, the Israelites are going to be in this place where they are not in a place of full happiness and everything in Egypt at this time. As a matter of fact, for hundreds of years, they've been sitting here in bondage. They have been slaves. We see this idea just previously. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. We see a taskmaster in Egypt kill an Israelite. So that's weird to say it's comfortable, but I wanted us to stop for a moment and think back, I know Exodus chapter 16 is going to be on the screen, but Exodus chapter 16, and this is, sorry John, we are looking slightly ahead, so this is going to be a slight spoiler for us, but Exodus chapter 16, verse 2 and 3 are going to go into this a little bit when the Israelites are finally out of bondage and out in the wilderness, and we're going to see their attitude towards Egypt. It says, and the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we have died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. When we sat, hear this last part. This is the attitude that we're going with tonight with the children of Israel. When we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us into the wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. And so while the Israelites in Egypt are not in this place where we imagine this total luxury or this total comfort in the way we would design it. What is it saying that they're saying? They're longing. Once they're out of Egypt, they're going to be in this place where they're going to be longing to be back in Egypt. Why? Because their daily needs are going to be taken care of. They get up, they go to work. Yes, there might be some brutal things that happen every once in a while. Maybe they argue with the taskmaster. Maybe they're not working fast enough. It's not a traditional word, comfort. And hear me, I'm not saying their life is good, okay? That's not what I'm trying to reference. But what we do know is that the people are later going to look back on their life in Egypt and say, we are so sick and tired of living in tents and having to be out here in the wilderness, and we long for our life in Egypt when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. It's the wording that they are going to use. They woke up, went about their work, and called it a day. And so we find ourselves in Exodus chapter 5, and what we're going to see is people whose lives are about to be totally turned upside down. And if you're sitting there and saying, okay, you're in bondage and your life is getting turned upside down, that's a pretty intense moment. But their lives are going to be turned upside down because of the plan of the Lord. Their lives are going to be turned upside down because of the plan of the Lord. So here we are, beginning of Exodus chapter 5. Moses has joined with his brother Aaron. They just have come from the people of Israel, and they've shown them the signs that God told them to show them. The people of Israel are like, wow, this is awesome. We have an opportunity here to be set free from bondage. And Moses and his brother Aaron are going to speak to Pharaoh. So we get to verse 1 of chapter 5. It says, afterward, this is after the signs, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord God of Israel, let my people go, that they might hold a feast to me in the wilderness. Now, before we move on, I think that this is an incredibly fascinating request that God commanded Moses and Aaron to make. If you remember back in chapter 3, we see God tell them, hey, you know what you need to do? Tell Pharaoh that you want to go out into the wilderness, 3 days into the wilderness, and make sacrifices. Now, the interesting thing to me about this request is that this is not a big, intense, I guess, a lot to ask of Pharaoh. As a matter of fact, the Israelites have sat here, they've been in bondage for hundreds of years, serving Pharaoh as slaves, not getting anything in return except for the meat pots and the bread, if you remember that. But they're sitting here, and they are going to finally come to Pharaoh and say, hey, we have a God, we know about him, and we want to go out into the wilderness, a 3 days journey, and worship him. And it's interesting that this is the simple request. It's not just, hey, decline it immediately if you're Pharaoh trying to run a business. And so what we see based on this simple request is the heart of Pharaoh, this very negative, cruel heart. And we get to verse 2 where Pharaoh is going to respond. It says, but Pharaoh said, who is the Lord that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. Now, if you know what's to come in this story, this verse is almost like, ooh, Pharaoh, my man, that was a bad mistake. That shouldn't have been your response here. It's almost like Pharaoh is, in the way I read it at least, it's almost like he's mocking God. Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? Have you not seen me? I'm essentially a god as Pharaoh over the people. And who is this Lord? There is a very lower mediocre Twitter account on Twitter called Old Takes Exposed. And I don't follow it, and no one else is on Twitter. It's like less than 2% of Americans are on Twitter. I'm one of them, and I'm pretty ashamed of it. But this is an account that is, like, the whole idea of it is if somebody says something silly and then it ends up being really wrong, this account will retweet it, and then people are exposed for their foolishness. And so I think that this moment in the life of Pharaoh might have been, or this verse is the ultimate old takes exposed moment. It is this moment where Pharaoh sits here and he says this moment, and it's like, Pharaoh, what are you saying? You don't realize what you're saying. It's the ultimate old takes exposed moment. Pharaoh's comments here absolutely would be on this website. It's interesting how Pharaoh responds to Moses and Aaron at this moment. It's almost like he's looking at what they're doing as a total power grab. Wow, Moses, you went and left Egypt for 40 years, and oh, by the way, you were here for 40 years, and you didn't stay with the people of Israel? Come on, Moses, and then you're going to come back and claim that you want to be in charge of the people of Israel, and you're using some God to do it, Moses? How dare you do this? This is absolutely pathetic on your part, Moses, and it's the reason Pharaoh might have this mindset is because it's totally how he operated. He's sitting there and he's having this attitude of saying, look, I have power over all the people of Egypt because I use the gods as my excuse to have rule over them. And so it's almost as he's looking at Moses and Aaron like, I think it's interesting in the verse how he says, and moreover, it's like, I don't know, God, and moreover, Moses and Aaron, I'm not going to let them go. How dare you come in and request this from me? It's almost like he's looking at him like two kids looking for a quick way to get into command over a people. But Moses and Aaron are going to respond with a lot of wisdom, and they immediately divert the attention back to the main focus, their God. It says in verse 3, then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Please let us go 3 days' journey into the wilderness, that we might sacrifice to the Lord our God, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or the sword. I love how they're so polite here. They say, please let us go 3 days' journey. We asked you once, now we're going to use manners. And they say, please. And they ask again. Pharaoh becomes incredibly angry in this moment. He's going to command that the Hebrews continue to make bricks, but this time they're not going to be given straw. They're going to have to go collect it. It's adding an entire step to the assembly chain where he's sitting here, or the assembly line, where he says, look, you're going to go out and you're going to make more bricks. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to give you any less bricks that you're going to have to make. You now have to go collect the straw. You have to make the mud, and you're going to still make the same number of bricks. And what is so sad about this story is that the taskmasters appear to become more pressing than before. And it even brings up the fact that they began to beat the Israelites to simply get them to hurry up in their work. Can you imagine the brutality that's taking place in this moment? It's an incredibly, it was uncomfortable before for the Israelites in terms of what they were having to go through every single day. But what it has become is an incredibly uncomfortable, not pleasant, nothing is good about it environment for the Israelites. The request for the sacrifice to God led the Israelites to a point of total discomfort in the situation they were in. We get to verse 15. It says, then the foreman of the people of Israel came and cried to Pharaoh, why do you treat your servants like this? No straw is given to your servants, yet they say to us, make bricks. And behold, your servants are beaten, but the fault is in your own people. Look, you're the reason we're going through this. Verse 17, but Pharaoh said, you are idle, you are idle. That is why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Go now and work. No straw will be given to you, but you must still deliver the same number of bricks. The foreman of the people of Israel saw that they were in trouble when he said, you shall by no means reduce your number of bricks, your daily task each day. Verse 20, they met Moses and Aaron who were waiting for them as they came out from Pharaoh. Imagine the attitude of the foreman in this moment. They walk into this idea of Pharaoh, and they're coming into Pharaoh to sit here and say, look, man, we just need we need a break. What you're tasking us with is nearly impossible. We can't maintain what you are asking us to do. And Pharaoh is so against this idea of them going and sacrificing to God that he's going to look at them as they're asking for a vacation. And he's going to look at them and say, no way you're going to get to do this. No way you're going to sacrifice. What you are is lazy. And he looks at them and he says you're idle twice. And that repetition is like an exclamation point to say, no, people of Israel, I know I've been sitting here on my lofty throne watching you work for me for hundreds of years. And watching you work for my family for hundreds of years while we sit here and reap the benefits, but you are lazy and you are not going to get to go worship your God. I want you to imagine what these foremen might be thinking about in this moment. The misery that they have been going through. I want to illustrate it like this. Can you imagine if there was a guest speaker out in the world, okay, that was very famous. And maybe let's just say this, this preacher is the most well-renowned preacher throughout all preachers. And guess what? He went to church here until he was like 5 years old, okay? So we're like, man, this kid was here, and then he went out in the world, but we haven't talked to him since. He's been out, and we saw little bits and pieces of him here and there, but we're gonna invite him back because we need a great message, and we're gonna have a gospel meeting, and we're gonna bring him in to preach. And the guy, this excellent preacher gets here, and he doesn't know any of us, okay? We just found his email on the internet, watched a few of his lessons on YouTube, and said, wow, we have to have this guy. And he comes in, and he begins to preach. And within the first 5 minutes, he immediately says, okay, and he starts pointing at people in the congregation and calling us out individually and very passionately and aggressively saying that we are all sinners and that we all have to work on individual things in our lives and that our lives are horrible and messed up. And we're sitting here, we're saying, we don't know this guy. Who on earth are you to come in and tell us this? Now, here's the interesting thing. Even if this person was correct, I don't think that you and I would take that very well. Well, maybe you're better than I am. I probably wouldn't take that very well. But even if he was sitting there and presenting very valid information that was spot on, that was very convicting to me in my personal life, if it was very personal, I wouldn't take it well. And here the foremen have Moses, who left for 40 years after simply being a Hebrew for a few years before spending his whole life in the palace. And he comes back and he says, here's a sign from God, and we're going to let God's plan be prevalent. And then immediately their life gets worse. How would you feel if you were the children of Israel in that moment? Look what they say to Moses in verse 21. Moses, by the way, sent by God. And they said to them, the Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. The blame stays off God and is directed directly at Moses. The people of Israel are angry, hear this, they're angry at their life, at their loss of consistent comfort while God's plan is being put into place. And with God's plan in motion, they are ready for their old life to be back. In our daily lives, your life, my life, a sacrifice to God is going to lead us to a less comfortable lifestyle. We live in this nation, and I love the fact that we get to live here, but we are easily surrounded by comfort. And I'm not just talking about comfort in the sense of luxury. Remember, that's not how we're using the word comfort tonight. We're easily surrounded by comfort where we can wake up, go about our lives, have things where we want them, when we want them. We can control how we interact with people. We can control all of this constantly. And it's easy for us to not sacrifice in order to stay in bondage of our old, comfortable selves. Just like with the Israelites, it was easy for them to say, hey, don't even consider bringing up us going out into the world to sacrifice again. Look what the Egyptians have done to us from this. We miss our old lives, and you and I, we long for this life of comfort. And once again, I feel like I say this every time I'm up here to speak, but man, this hits home right with me. This is one of those things that I think is just a struggle of people in this world, and specifically me personally. But we long for this life of comfort, that life that, even if it's not always easy, it's better than the alternative of being uncomfortable with our next thought and our interactions with other people. And as I sit here and I think about this, and like I said before, I genuinely think that this is where I might struggle the most in just daily interactions. Maybe I need to lose comfort, join in on God's plan on how I'm living my life. Maybe I need to lose comfort in my daily interactions if I've never told anyone in my workplace anything extra than that I go to church. I haven't told them the story of Jesus. Maybe I need to lose comfort if I've never studied with somebody I know about Christ. Like if I've never had to sit down study with a person who's not a member of the body of Christ. If I've never sat down and studied with someone, maybe I need to get out of that comfort zone, be less comfortable, and have that study. Maybe I need to lose comfort if I haven't had a conversation with my friend or family member who's fallen away from Christ, because that would make that relationship awkward. I don't know about you guys, but I've been in every one of those situations. These challenges are to every single one of us. They're to all of us who are sitting in this room that have decided that a comfortable consistency is better than God's plan turning my life upside down. I think that everyone in this room, and that's a generality, of course. I'm assuming that all of us in this room are people who have a desire to follow Christ. You're here on a Sunday night. You're ready to hear a message. You came here to sing. I think everyone in this room would know a place in our lives where we could get uncomfortable in order to make a positive impact on the kingdom. I'm going to say that one more time. I think all of us in this room would know a place in our lives where we could get more uncomfortable in order to make a positive impact on the kingdom. I need to be willing and ready to lose the mental comfort of my day-to-day life for the sake of the plan of God, for the sake of His plan in my life. And that's an incredibly difficult thing. That's a challenge to every single one of us, I believe. No matter where you are, what stage you are in life, there's a moment where I can say tomorrow or the next day and the next day and the next day, I'm going to choose to be uncomfortable in order for the gospel to spread, so the plan of God, the kingdom of God, can be prevalent in the lives of everyone. I think it's interesting. Moses is hurting for the people. I mean, here he is. He's been told by God he's the leader. They come in, they sandblast him, right? They say, look, dude, you're the reason we're miserable. We essentially hate you, and that hurts. I don't like when people trash on me. So Moses is sad. And then we get to verse 22. It says, then Moses turned to the Lord and said, O Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why did you ever send me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people. And hear the pain in Moses' voice here. And you have not delivered your people at all. It's amazing that through all that Moses has seen, through the experience that he had at the burning bush with the leprous hand and the snake and all the other things, that we see doubt from him in this moment. It's a doubt that is in the process of things changing, the plan of God causing chaos in order to get to a beautiful solution. You and I experience this when we get uncomfortable for Christ. If we look at verse 12 of chapter 6, I think that there is an interesting moment. And once again, we're skipping ahead. This is Moses talking to God. He says, but Moses said to the Lord, behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me, for I am of uncircumcised lips? I can't speak well. It is interesting to me that he is immediately going to go back to his old struggle. In agony and pain, through trying to enact God's plan in my life, old fears of why I maybe hadn't tried to enact his plan in my life before will begin to resurface. This is what Moses is going through. He sits here and he says, look, I was terrified of this, God. You bring me here, and now this entire nation hates me. I left my easy, comfortable lifestyle tending sheep to come here, and now a nation hates me because of it, and I'm not sure I can do this. And once again, have you forgotten? I can't speak well. Why'd you choose me for this? And he starts to begin to doubt the reason he was doing this. And when we go through these moments where we are maybe going through a difficult time trying to put the plan of God into our lives, we're going to have these moments where we start to redoubt the plan of God, where we begin to redoubt ourselves, and we go back to those old fears of why we didn't. Going back to verse 1 of chapter 6, God's going to give his response. It says, "But the Lord said to Moses, 'Now you shall see what I will do with Pharaoh.'" By the way, that's an exciting statement if you're an Israelite. They don't even realize it. "For with a strong hand he will send them out, and with a strong hand he will drive them out of his land." God essentially looks at Moses and says, man, I'll handle it. I've got you covered. I will be your champion. And he goes on to give his promise and to give all of these details of how he's going to do this and the beauty of the promised land and all these different things. We'll get to a little bit more of that in just a moment. But God gives Moses the entire plan, lays it out in front of him, and he says, go tell the children of Israel, because they're going to be encouraged. Verse 9. Moses spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses because of their broken spirit and harsh slavery. When the message of God begins to cause this discomfort in our lives, we begin to quickly shut out his message from our lives. I don't know if you've experienced that, but as we start to feel this, God's plan isn't making me feel too great. Let's remove the plan of God from what's right in front of me, and we stop caring. And the Israelites had been made uncomfortable by the situation God had placed them in, and they were sick and tired of hearing new ideas from him, even though he had a promise to him. And I love that, I really don't love it, but what he says is it's a broken spirit and a harsh slavery. And this is why Israel is starting to get to this point where they're doubting God and they're doubting the messenger. The centuries of slavery had made them start to think that slavery was what was the big thing in their lives, that they were almost a part of slavery more than they were a part of the nation of God. I appreciate the reading of Ezekiel 20, verse 1 through 8. And if we had more time, we would absolutely flesh out Ezekiel 20. But in Ezekiel 20, verse 8, the Israelites, we see, have invested into Egyptian culture. And it's going back and it's referencing this moment, and it's saying, hey, God's talking. He says, I tried to tell them to stay away from the Egyptian gods. I tried to tell them to stay out of that, but they couldn't help but be a part of the gods and the Egyptian gods and their food and the lifestyle that came with Egypt. And it makes me wonder, once again, talking to myself a lot through this, for us, our time as comfortable lives of Americans has led to a point where we're tied up in the bondage of comfortable interactions, and we look at those comfortable interactions as being greater than the plan of God, greater than the plan of God that we serve. And we've gotten to this point where we, like the Israelites, have really been okay with this idea of, you know what? I'm good with not really ever having to break out of my comfort zone in any interaction, and I worship the comfort of my day-to-day conversations and my day-to-day consistency of I know where everything and what everything is going to be like each day. In our lives where we have a promised eternal life, I struggle with why I still choose comfort in our interactions over an uncomfortable life invested in him. If we're willing to choose God, and it's so, when we see God's plan ahead of us, this question becomes even more challenging. Chapter 6 and verse 6 through 8, we're finally going to get back to the full plan that God laid out for us. Starting in verse 6. Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I am the Lord. Just like the Israelites have a promise to them, we've been given this massive, beautiful promise of an eternal life next to the throne of our Father, an inheritance with Jesus. If we are going to let comforts be our God, we are never going to leave the bondage of a comfort-based life. If we're going to let comfort be our God, we're never going to leave the bondage of a comfort-based life. And so we have to be willing and ready to have a faith in his promise, a faith in the promise that is eternal life, a faith in the promise that when we choose his plan for us, greater things will happen than if we're choosing a life in comfort. Tonight, if there's anything we can do for you, maybe you want to put on Christ in baptism and begin this life, and it's a life that is going to need to be uncomfortable. We would love to baptize you into Christ as you begin your life. If you need to study more about that, we would love to study with you. If there's anything you need this evening, we ask you to please come as we stand in us.